I want to begin by saying that, look, I am a man, all right? I'm not a woman, and for that reason, I will never be able to fully understand not only the journey of finding out that you're pregnant before you feel ready, but I will never understand the experience of carrying a child to term. No man will ever be able to understand that, and for that reason, I want to be very, very sensitive as I approach this issue. But with that being said, I don't feel that I need to be a woman or experience a pregnancy in order to communicate what I believe God's desire is when it comes to life. And for that reason, what I want to do in this video is I want to try to debunk every pro-choice argument, at least all the major ones. And to be clear, I am speaking to two different groups of people. First, I want to speak to people, many of whom are Christians, who may be using these arguments to justify abortion in hopes of showing you just how majorly flawed these arguments are. But I also want to speak to the Christian who may be engaged in conversations with other people who may be using these arguments to help you understand how you can respond appropriately and how you can help other people see just how majorly flawed all of these pro-choice arguments are. So what I want to do is I want to address what I believe are the top 7 most common, most popular pro-choice arguments to justify abortion and why they are all majorly flawed and how you can discuss them and debunk them with people who may promote them. Okay, so we might as well start with the big one, and that is the idea or the argument that a fetus is not a human. So we've got to start here because this argument is the foundation, honestly, for all of the other arguments. This is perhaps the most flawed argument that people use to justify abortion. It's the idea that, hey, after all, it's just a clump of cells. It's not a real human being yet. And people who make this claim are denying scientific evidence because the best science that we have available today proves that at the moment of conception, when the egg and sperm fertilize, that zygote has its own unique DNA, thus making it a living being. Now, in addition to this, most women don't even realize that they are pregnant until on average around 4 to 6 weeks. And so by week 6, that zygote has progressed to the embryonic stage of development where basic structures become the brain, the spinal cord, the heart, etc. So by week 6, oftentimes the heartbeat can be detected by some ultrasounds, and over 90% of all abortions take place within the 6 to 12 week time span, which means that the embryo has already started its development, which means if left uninterrupted, meaning if there were no other processes, no abortion taking place, that this embryo would automatically, by deduction, result in a natural birth process. Now, along these same lines, some may argue that a fetus only becomes a person when it is able to live independently from the parent or when it reaches a certain level of brain function or consciousness. Now, once again, a very majorly flawed argument. I mean, let's be honest, after the baby is born, it's still completely dependent upon the mother for survival. If it's not nourished, it will die. So let me ask you a question. Would you say that to a parent whose child is born with a defect that will never allow that child to live, quote unquote, independently from the parent and will never exhibit, quote unquote, normal brain functionality? Would we justify that they have the right to terminate that child's life simply because that child will never be able to live independently from their parents? Would we say that about people who are in a coma, for instance, where they're not exhibiting much brain activity at all? And maybe those who might be cognitively impaired, are we saying that these people are not human beings? So if we conclude that the fetus is a real human being, then we must also conclude that terminating it is equivalent to murder. Now, why must we make this conclusion? Because if we call one act murder when the child is outside of the womb, we must call the exact same act murder if it's inside of the womb. You cannot have it both ways, right? So don't let anybody try to water this down by calling it reproductive rights or calling it health care or calling it termination. Look, the idea is the same. If a child is inside the womb and just a few months later, if that child were to be born, then we would call one act murder and the other we justify in saying it's not. And this leads me to the second, probably the most popular pro-choice argument that we are going to debunk and show that is majorly flawed, which is this idea of my body, my choice. You see all sorts of people holding signs. This is very much a talking point for many politicians today. They'll say, hey, you know what? I'm going to fight for the right for a woman to have the right to choose. Now, when someone says this to you, you ought to ask them a choice to do what? Choose to do what? Because we like to throw that terms around like, okay, woman has the right to choose. Well, choose to do what, right? And if you keep kind of drilling down, you'll oftentimes get to the point where this person has no other place other than to admit the fact that choose to murder, right? But we talked about that. So after you continue to press them, it will be literally impossible for people to deny that this choice is equivalent to murder if we are able to first and foremost debunk the first idea that a fetus is not a human being. Now, pro-choice proponents would like to make the argument that a woman should have the right to do whatever she wants with her body. And to that statement, I would say, you know what? You're absolutely right. She should. If you were born with it or if you purchased it with your own money, then yeah, you can do whatever you want with your body part. But the fundamental problem and the reason why this argument is so majorly flawed is because that child living inside of that woman is not her body. It is a separate body that has a separate, unique DNA, that has unique fingerprints, that is only unique to that body, that human being, that is dependent upon her, but it's not her body. And for that reason, that child has its own set of rights independent of the rights of the woman. So the only difference between that body and ours is that it is not at the point where it can advocate for itself. But guess what? Neither can a newborn baby. A newborn baby cannot advocate for its own life either, but we don't dispose of them. And if we did, we would go straight to jail. So we have to say, hey, just because a child is not able to advocate for themselves does not give us the right to be able to make decisions based on what we feel is best, because once again, we don't do those types of things when the child is outside of the womb. Let me give you an illustration that I think might click. Let's just say you have a person who is dependent on life support for their survival. Does that mean that this person is now just a part of that machine because it is dependent upon that machine for life? No, being dependent on a machine for life does not necessarily make that person a part of the machine. That person is their own unique person with their own set of rights. So this idea of my body, my choice is easily debunked because clearly we can all conclude that the body of the baby who is living inside this woman is its own entity, its own body, and therefore, because it cannot choose for itself, we have an obligation to protect those who cannot advocate for themselves. Okay, so the third argument that many pro-choice proponents would like to make is kind of similar and along the same lines as the second one, and that's the idea that men should not have the right to, quote unquote, make laws about a woman's body and what a woman should do and cannot do with her body. Once again, this is yet a very, very easy argument to debunk because I've got news for you. Men are not making up new laws about murder, right? Once again, we have to agree that what this procedure is murder. Nobody's making up new laws about murder. God instituted that law a long time ago before you and I were ever born. It's called the sixth commandment out of the 10 commandments, right? So this commandment of thou shalt not murder transcends time, transcends culture. It's a universal right. Not only that, one of the main functions of the government is to protect the lives of the innocent, especially those who cannot protect themselves. This is what the government exists to do. It's called justice. So you cannot be someone who has it both ways. You can't be someone who says you want justice for innocent lives that are being taken outside of the womb, but you excuse innocent lives being taken inside of the womb, but you say you want justice. You can't have it both ways. Either you're concerned about justice and protecting the lives of all the innocent, whether born or unborn, or you're not. So to be clear, there should be no need to quote unquote make any new laws about abortion or murder because our country already has laws enforced that we all agree is best for the safety and the sanctity of life as it relates to our society. We all agree that these laws are good and helpful to maintain safety, and therefore those same laws should apply to the unborn. Okay, so now let's get into some more difficult ones, and we're going to talk about this idea of what about sexual trauma and incest? So what if a woman gets pregnant as a result of one of these situations? And so because this is a major, major issue, I want to approach this with the utmost sensitivity. And for that reason, I'm going to do my best to try to temper my tone here, because any woman who has ever been the victim of assault or incest or any sort of trauma like this, I want to go on record and say that this very well may be one of the most devastating experiences that any human being would ever have to experience in life. And I want to be sensitive to that. With that being said, this argument to excuse or justify abortions simply because of sexual trauma and incest is also majorly flawed for several reasons. The first reason is because cases of abortion relating to sexual trauma make up less than 1% of all the cases of abortion, and incest less than 0.5%. So basing the argument for the legality of abortion on these rare cases basically distracts. It distracts from the larger issue of elective abortions, basically people who are getting abortions for personal reasons, social reasons, economic reasons, which basically make up the overwhelming majority of procedures. So this is an example of trying to justify the majority by using the minority. Not only that, while sexual trauma and incest are horrific, and I mean horrific and tragic events that deserve great empathy and support, the key issue remains the same. It's whether the unborn child conceived in these circumstances is any less human or less valuable than a child conceived in any other way. The unborn child, listen, no child gets the opportunity to choose the circumstances of its conception and therefore should not be punished for the crimes of the perpetrator. Ending the life of the unborn child does not undo the trauma, but instead oftentimes adds a second act of violence against an innocent life. Not too long ago, my brothers and sisters, I had the opportunity to meet a beautiful young lady who told me that she was the product of rape and that her mother had a choice because everybody in her family told her mother that this was going to be difficult, that this child was always going to remind her of the man who assaulted her, and she needed to go ahead and just get this procedure taken care of and get an abortion. And she broke down in tears right in front of me, and she told me how grateful she was that her mother made the right decision and she had an opportunity to live. And now this young lady is flourishing in life. She's a born-again Christian. She's active in ministry. She is makes great contributions to society, has a phenomenal career, went to college, and making great strides in life. Imagine if her mother would have made the decision, well, you know what? Because the circumstances were less than ideal, I am going to have an abortion and end this child's life. You see, abortion does not erase the consequences or the effects of sexual trauma or incest. As a matter of fact, in many cases, it can add further emotional and psychological distress to the woman, as many women have gotten abortions and later on they struggle with guilt, regret, and grief. And so the principle remains this. You should never commit one sin to cover up another. Nowhere in the scriptures, nowhere in the Bible are we encouraged to do that. And the reason why I say Bible is because you would be surprised at how many Christians are advocating for abortion rights. And finally, while this may be very difficult for some, we must always keep in mind that adoption is the preferred option. But that leads me to the next majorly flawed pro-choice argument, and that's this idea that unwanted children lead to societal problems. Oh man, look, this one is so easy to debunk. Listen, many pro-choice advocates claim that unwanted children are more likely, because they look at the statistics and they say, okay, looking at the statistics, unwanted children are more likely to grow up in poverty. They might be facing abuse or contribute to societal issues like crime and homelessness. And so the assumption that a child's life will lead to societal problems simply because they are unwanted is flawed. There's a lot of children who are born into difficult circumstances who are able to overcome those challenges and lead meaningful and successful lives. Listen, many people who start in very difficult or unwanted situations grow up to be resilient. They grow up to make meaningful contributions to society, similar to the young lady that I talked about earlier. So it's wrong for us. It's unjust to terminate a life based on the assumption to get ahead and play God and to make an assumption that we've got this whole person's life completely laid out. We know exactly how they're going to go. We know exactly all the challenges that they're going to face. And we know exactly the contribution that they are or not going to make to society. It's wrong for us to base our decision on an assumption that they may encounter some challenges or hardships. Listen, the value of a person's life is not determined by the circumstances of their birth or their early environment, because every child, regardless of how or why they are conceived, deserves a chance to live and grow. So once again, to be clear, the major flaw here is that you are already predetermining that child's future and that child's contribution to society is basically meaningless. And this is what's called a slippery slope. If we start terminating the lives of every child who is born in adverse circumstances because we assume their lives don't have value and can't contribute value, then what are we going to do about all the other people who are born in less than ideal circumstances? Finally, unwanted does not necessarily have to mean, or we have to assume, that child will be unloved. There are countless examples of children who were unwanted by their biological parents, but were not unloved because they had maybe other family members, grandparents, aunts, uncles, a community, a church, or whatever, or maybe they were adopted by parents who actually did love them immensely. So we cannot assume that just because a child may be unwanted, that's going to lead to a life where they'll be unloved and therefore, as a result, not make major contributions to our society. Okay, number 6 is another very, very popular pro-choice argument, and that's the idea that banning abortion is just going to lead to illegal and unsafe abortions. Once again, this is extremely flawed and easily debunked. So the idea here is that we would rather value the safety of the woman over the safety of the baby. Think about that. So what we're saying here is, okay, well, because this is going to lead to illegal and unsafe abortions, then we need to legalize it. So what we're doing here is we're basically saying, well, the value of the mother's life is of greater value than the value of the baby. So basically, we're valuing the safety of the mother over the safety of the baby, who cannot make decisions for themselves. And by the way, this mother who we're valuing the safety of, her life is not at risk. I'll talk about that here in just a moment. Her life is not at risk here. So the woman has the decision and the baby doesn't. So by making abortions, quote unquote, safe, as if there is any such thing as a safe abortion, we're basically indirectly not being concerned about the safety of the baby. So it's hypocritical, first and foremost. But not only that, even legal abortions carry risks, both physically and emotionally. Legal abortions, right, can lead to complications such as infections, hemorrhaging, damage to reproductive organs, psychological trauma, sometimes called post-abortion syndrome. So the notion that legal abortion is entirely safe is also very misleading. Not only that, in states or countries with stricter abortion laws, the availability of resources for pregnant women has shown to significantly reduce abortion rates. So in other words, we need to do more at being able to support women who are pregnant who might have an unwanted pregnancy. For example, in areas where abortion is restricted, offering assistance such as maternity care, job training, financial help, childcare makes women less likely to seek illegal abortions. So supporting women through these difficult situations is the primary key to reducing abortion rates, whether it's done legally or illegally. So to be clear, many pro-choice advocates will make the argument, once again, very flawed, that if abortion is restricted or if it's banned, well then, man, wow, people are going to just now seek dangerous illegal abortions. So it's better to just keep it legal and protect women. Now, guys, let's just think about that for a second, right? Let's think about the logic behind what I just said for just a moment. In our society, we don't make something legal just because some people might break the law anyway. For example, we all agree that murder is illegal, but we don't say, well, since people are already going to commit murder and it's not safe, regardless of the law, they're going to do it anyway. So let's just legalize it and make it safer. Nobody does that. Who does that? Who is in favor of that? Nobody. That would be absurd. The law is meant to reflect what is morally right and to protect innocent life, not simply cater to what people might do. Not only that, if I'm just being honest, y'all, this argument oftentimes shifts the conversation away from the core moral issue. And that's the reason why I'm doing this video, because I want to make sure that as you're engaging in these conversations and people start to try to take you away from the main issue, that you know how to redirect the conversation back. The main issue is not all this ancillary stuff. It's whether the unborn child's life has a right to life. The fact that unsafe illegal abortions might occur does not justify the legal right to take the life of an innocent human being. And the seventh and final argument that many pro-choice proponents will make is, well, what if the mother's life is at risk? Once again, we're talking about less than 1% of all cases, because as I previously stated, most abortions are what we call elective, right? Meaning that they are not performed because of any medical emergencies, but more so for social or personal reasons or economic reasons. So this is once again another attempt to try to justify the majority by focusing on the minority. So in modern medicine, oftentimes when complications arise that endanger the life of the mother, doctors are trained to be able to know how to treat both patients, the mother and the baby. So in rare cases where there's a life-threatening situation, a life-threatening complication, medical interventions can be made to save the mother's life, even if that unfortunately results in the loss of the baby. However, this is very fundamentally different from an abortion, where the goal up front of the abortion is to intentionally end the life of the unborn child, which is not the same goal of trying to save the life of the mother. So for example, in cases like an ectopic pregnancy, where the fertilized egg implants outside of the uterus, so the mother's life is in serious danger. So removing the ectopic pregnancy is a necessary intervention to save her life, but it's not considered an abortion because the intention is not to end a life, but to save another life. Similarly, in cases where early delivery is required to save the mother, for example, let's say there's severe preeclampsia or whatnot, doctors may induce labor or perform an emergency C-section to protect the mother while also doing everything they can to save the baby, even if the baby is too premature to survive. So the key, once again, here for this point is to focus on the intent. In cases where the mother's life is at risk, the goal of the medical treatment is to save the mother's life while also attempting to save the child, not the intent of directly trying to end the life of the child. So that's why we have legal protections for both the mother and the child that should be upheld. It's not necessary to legalize abortion in order to perform and provide medical care when a mother's life is in danger. As a matter of fact, in some countries with restrictive abortion laws, they still make allowances for life-saving medical procedures in these very rare cases. Okay, guys, so listen, we've seen in this video the arguments that many people will try to make to justify abortion, and I have shown you that none of them hold up. All of them are majorly flawed whenever you hold them up under scrutiny. So whether it's an issue of a woman's rights, right, my body, my choice, or difficult cases like sexual trauma or incest, all of these arguments fail to recognize the one fundamental truth that life, your life, my life, the life of the born, the life of the unborn, every life has inherent value from the moment of conception, which is at the moment when the egg and the sperm fertilize. The unborn are human beings with their own set of rights, and they deserve the same protection that we afford to every other human life. Now, with that being said, my brothers and sisters, I apologize if I got super excited and passionate about this, but we all have to stand up. I have to stand up, and you should be standing up for the rights of all those who are unborn. And I understand that this is an incredibly sensitive topic. And my intention here is not to condemn or create any sort of shame or guilt for anybody. That is not my intention. My intention of making this video is to bring clarity. And for those of you who may have supported abortion in the past, my prayer and hope for you is hopefully by watching this video, it will encourage you to take some time to reflect on the truth about life and its value. And there's always hope. There's always grace. There's always forgiveness, no matter what decisions you've made. So maybe you're watching this and you have had an abortion. I want you to know that God loves you. God values you. God values every human life. And in Jesus Christ, there is forgiveness. There is no shame. There is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And that, my brother or sister, specifically my sisters, includes you. And finally, if you're a Christian watching this video and maybe you have been engaged in conversation with other people and you just weren't sure exactly how to vocalize some of your frustrations because they're bringing up arguments that you feel that are flawed, but you weren't quite sure exactly how to verbalize those, I hope that this video equipped you to engage in conversations around this issue, both with truth, but also balanced with compassion. These are very, very difficult conversations. They are necessary, but we must be called to be the voice for the voiceless and to stand for the vulnerable and to uphold the sanctity of life in every context. I would love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this topic? Let me know in the comment section below. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.